All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the unit comparisons and analysis as we normally do. As you can see here, we have Big Daddy Greil on the side. If you're not familiar with how these videos work, this series in particular, I'll go through it quickly. So I will be showcasing the new units, their stats, and what they kind of like, confirming their role in the meta. But more importantly, this video kind of gives you an idea of why these units may not be as must-haves or needs in the current game as you may think they are. Whether you're influenced by somebody else or myself, it doesn't matter. This is just to make you make a better objective choice. Everything I look at in comparison is from a free-to-play budget perspective. So if you are uncertain on whether you need or want these units, let this video help you make that decision. To summarize it all, it's like a should you pull, and at the end of the video, I'll also look at the mathematics behind how much it takes to acquire one of these units. If you miss the skills and a kind of like meta impression of the unit, check out yesterday's video, which you'll find in the same playlist and of course on the channel. So let's jump into it, shall we? All right, so yesterday when I talked about Greil, it's very important that I mentioned that the only thing that would make him stand out as a green axe armor would be if he was speedy, if he was quick. That would make him similar in a role to someone like Amelia, and that's actually not a very common like green axe role. Unfortunately, that's not the stat spread he ended up having, and it's just kind of like a better like Halloween Dorcas, kind of like Hector, Legendary Hector kind of stat spread, and we already have like so many of these anyways, so he's literally in a place that's already fully saturated when it comes to role in the game. Now of course he does have really good attack, really good defense, really good res, and low speed, but when you have units like Surtur, Legendary Hector, LA Hector, I mean there's just so many blue axe armors, and even somebody like M. Grima can compare. It's just not really, you know, he's not really doing anything that's going to be different from what other options you may have, and will actually outperform him in that case. So let's look at what I want to compare him to. In your 3 and 4 star pool, of course your green axe armor will be Sheena. So Sheena can do some things, not as well as Greil, but similarly. And that will take advantage of course, when you look at the builds on the left, you can obviously apply them to Greil, and Greil can use the same exact builds and probably do them better when you consider them both at base merges. But the advantage, of course, is that you probably have tons of Sheenas in your barracks, or any of these units that I showcase, and you can merge them up for additional stats, or even spend flowers on them. That would give you a long-term better stat spread than what you see with any of these 5-star exclusives. So that's why it's important to look at the budget options we have. So steady stance, guard, quick riposte, attack smoke, all fairly budget things you can find in the summoning pool or in the Grails. What you see on the left is pretty much just a kind of guard, quick riposte, Ignis, big nuke build, and both of them can do it, but you know, you already have Sheena as an example of that. It's a very solid frontline tank build. The advantage with Sheena is she does actually have a bit more res. You could alternate to use something like a res slaying axe instead. You could even do like attack res bond as alternative options. You can run some ploys, which Greil can do, but you know, Sheena has a little bit more base res to do it with. So yeah, that's pretty much what you get. Another version of Sheena is actually making her extremely fast. I wanted to mention also in the comparisons, the stat spreads that you see, that the updates on the builder hasn't taken into account like merges yet, and merges do make a big deal. Like for example, removing the HP Bane would give her like 50 HP, 51 HP after one merge, which makes a pretty big deal. Regardless of that, we have Sheena as a more speedier version compared to the slower version, and this is kind of like an Amelia take on it. Amelia does have a brand new refine. She does this a bit better, but again, 5-star exclusive. Greil can't really do this build, which kind of makes Sheena more adaptable, and especially some of you probably already have a plus speed Sheena. If you played Arena, then this is a take on something cool that you can do with her. So instead of relying on quick riposte, you can actually just run speedy stuff like attack speed bond, steady posture. If you think you have too much speed, of course you can use other things like attack defense bond instead. Guard is still really good in the B slot, but you could honestly swap it out for renewal instead. So those are all really dynamic ways of using Sheena. I've actually used some of these builds myself on my account, and Sheena's still one of the better Green Axe armors in the game, even with so many of these released, just because of merges, and that makes such a big deal. Unlike our good red armored Drog, which we will likely touch on later, but not bad. Okay, so next up, we got Soren. So, Soren's in a really difficult place. Unfortunately, being a Blue Tome Cavalier does not give you very much room to stand out from the crowd. Even with Soren's stat spread being as good as it is, it just doesn't matter when somebody like Reinhardt over there ends up, literally like default build. Just give him a dance skill in the B slot, because who really cares what his B slot is, right? The dude can run Lancebreaker, Wings of Mercy, Escape. It doesn't matter what his B slot is. Like, it's very irrelevant. His best one's probably like Chill Res if you really wanted to fully invest. And you could get that off NY Leg Yarn, but I just like him dancing, you know? It's Reinhardt. Really though, like, Rein is a really common unit. He has a Brave Tome, and the only real way that Soren competes with that is running something like a Blarblade Tome. So Fury Desperation, Attack Speed Seal, for instance. And Soren can try for some really strong nukes, or relying on a double through Desperation. And that's kind of the best way to use him compared to Rein. But, Rein's really good. So, just use Rein. Now, if you wanted another comparison, of course, it's La Rochelle in the 3 and 4 4-star pool, 4 and 5-star pool. She's got a really unique tome, which makes her stat spread pretty similar to Soren. And that's because she has more res, close attack and speed, but you're more likely to get a preferred IV over La Rochelle, and you can also patch up her Bane with the new update as well. So La Rochelle ends up being slightly tankier, actually probably a lot more tankier in both defense and res. Her attack and speed is very comparable, and of course Fury Desperation is pretty staple. It also allows you to use specials like Iceberg and Glacies that you otherwise wouldn't really be able to use on Soren because his res just isn't high enough. Special mention to Ursula as well, and this one is going to show off the merges. Like I mentioned earlier, the merges don't take into account the extra stats that Ursula would have here, which is an additional HP, attack, and speed. It's not so impressive. Ursula's stat spread is a little bit dated compared to the first two I showed you. Like, Rein still holds up to this day, and La Rochelle is also really good. But Ursula does have some pretty low attack, but the thing is, her speed is still very serviceable. And when you're running Blade Tomes, what you really need to focus on is mostly speed and not the attack stat. So even though Ursula has a lower attack stat than any of these units I just shown, what really matters when you use something like a Blade Tome is actually just some buffs. Hone Cavalry, for instance, usually gets the job done, Fort Cavalry, and you have yourself that. Of course, the reason and the most important thing that you have to consider with Grand Hero Battle units like Ursula is they have long-term potential in AR and Arena as bonus units. So if you choose to invest in somebody like Ursula, you'll be very delighted when you see that their bonus unit season returns. Not only do they get extra stats, but they're really strong. Ursula, for instance, could be a pretty good AR defense unit. I've used her once in AR defense as a unit. She did respectably well. So I wanted to give her a small shout out here because she is in the same movement type class. A little bit outdated, but good long-term investment nonetheless. Next up, we have Mist. So Mist is it's a bit better of a spot than it is with Soren, because Blue Tome Cav, you have a couple options there that you may have already invested in. But Mist is definitely cool because she's got less competition. There's only like 4 Green Tome Cavs, or 3, so there's not that many. Unfortunately, Mist stat spread isn't really all that good. It's just something we've already seen before, very similar to LA Lilina. This is honestly just LA Lilina from the next year. Like, that's pretty much what it looks like to me. She's not going to outperform Thunderhead Olwen when it comes to offensiveness. So in terms of 5-star exclusives, Thunderhead Olwen still beats her. And in terms of the budget options, I want to obviously showcase the one and only Cecilia. So Cecilia is not as good at running this build. I have to say that for sure. But she does have a super boon in speed. So she ends up being 5 speed stat, like 5 stats lower, which is pretty it is actually something to consider and can make the difference in a lot of cases, which is why somebody like Cecilia definitely needs merges and honed cavalry to definitely use Gromblade properly. Her attack stat's good though. It's still pretty respectable, and merges do go a long way, and so do buffs to make sure Cecilia can run something like Gromblade build. Yeah, and that's pretty much why I would still recommend her. But the thing that really makes Cecilia better is flexibility in build as well, which is the Ground Raven stuff. So the fact that she actually, and this is what makes Cecilia still the most unique green cav, Tome Cav, is the fact that she has high defense. Her defense is still 21 base, which is nuts for a cavalry unit, and because of that, she's still the best Grand Raven user. So if you don't want to use her with a Blade Tome, you have Grand Raven as the other option, and if those Reinhardts or Lins or Veronicas give you some trouble, then of course Cecilia is the ideal choice for that. Depending on what tier you are, that's probably not so relevant the higher you go, but it's still nice to have that as an option for when you do run into it. Running attack res bond from her armored version, attack defense bond as a seal really does pump up her defensive stats. Give her plenty of scaling through Grand Raven. Grand Raven is of course like a TA effect. You don't necessarily have to use attack res bond. It's just she doesn't really need TA in a lot of cases, especially if you buff her up with like 4 cav and hone cav. And most units will end up doing 0 anyways, even without TA. So that's why attack res bond's a little bit better to secure your kills on units that may not actually be triangle advantaged, like another green unit or something like that. Plus better damage off Iceberg. Dull ranged is the best sort of skill you can use when you're fighting big nukers, and that would be her biggest weakness. Like somebody who might be running a Blade Tome, like Nino. You don't really want to be taking those sort of hits, and running dull range guarantees you don't die to those sort of things. Okay. Next up is, of course, Ike. Everyone likes Ike. So Ike has a very, very, very good stat spread. Very min-maxed, I would say. Low res, which we could totally have expected from him. And his attack and speed is really high up there, with defense being very respectable and HP being low enough that he can pump up his attack and speed. So this is kind of like a stat spread that does work out really well because red armors, there's not that many. So he's competing with, of course, well, isn't this immersive? Very immersive. The problem with Ike is he is competing with what everyone already has. And that guy has a better special in general when it comes to damage dealing. So I wanted to give him escape route because it's immersive. It's you know, that's a BK with his warp powder shenanigans. It just makes more sense to me. The idea is that you proc Black Luna without necessarily having to rely on stuff like Bold Fighter, Vengeful Fighter, Special Fighters, which both of these guys can use really well. But to use Ike, his role is a little bit different from Black Knight. While Black Knight should outperform him in damage output, Ike actually has some sustain with Radiant Ether, and I think that's what makes him different than BK. So I think out of the units I've showcased so far, Ike is definitely the most unique from the banner, and that is why you would use him, because of Radiant Ether, combinations with Special Spiral or Special Fighter, and relying on those procs for decent damage plus healing is the way to use them. But when it comes to damage output, a Merge Black Knight, especially after the Merge update, is going to give him very comparable stat spreads, both in attack and speed. Defense is also similar, and I mean, if you don't have the fighter skills, Flashing Blade in this seal will get the job done on every single engagement. You pretty much get your Black Lunas. So, moving on though, we have the one and only. I had to give a shout out to him because he is in the 3 and 4 star pool, so he deserves to be having at least some moment of a spotlight. He does have the speed, he doesn't have the attack. And that's okay if you rely on Ignis to do the job. So our boy Drog has the speed to use Flashing Blade, Slaying Edge, and Ignis to hit for like 30-some damage. That's how you can use Drog to do damage, but outside of Ignis, our boy here is gonna do like no damage. I swear Drog is a good unit. I swear, guys. I'm not trolling. He just requires a lot of help. Alright, moving on. Titania. So Titania is very much welcome as a new unit because it's a Red Tome Cav, which you pretty much couldn't get unless you had SM Erica or Leo. Why do I even mention Leo? There's no point in mentioning Leo. Leo is like on his own planet in terms of Red Tome Cav. The real comparison is actually SM Erica. And SM Erica is not here right now. Where's SM Erica? There she is. Okay, SM Erica is a very similar stat spread to Titania. Actually, almost the same attack and speed, with Titania having a bit more res and SM Erica having more attack and speed. Now, she's not a unit that I expect most people to have. I'm just using her as an example for what you would use Titania to be built as. Titania's stat spread is very good for a Blade Tome and a Blade Tome build. And it's really as simple as that. Fury, Desperation, attack speed 2, Savage Blow, whatever, cavalry buffs, and you're good to go. Very standard staple build. Would recommend it highly, especially if you needed that role covered on your cavalry teams. However, if you don't want to really invest that sort of stuff, you could actually just use her default tome, which is still pretty good because Titania has a good res stat for it, and this is something that SM Erica wouldn't do. It's more similar to what Leo would do. I forget Leo. You could just use Titania with her default tome, give her like some res. You can give her like a QR seal if you feel her speed isn't good enough. I don't really think that's the case though. You should probably use like attack speed bond and just go flat out on some sort of like icebergs or glacies, big nukes like that, combined with her default tome, and maybe use her more as a defensive mage as opposed to the Fury Desperation stuff. That's a different take on it, and I think it's good. But if you wanted to use Blade, you got yourself good choices there. So that pretty much summarizes the banner, how they compare to most units already in the game. Honestly, Ike is the most unique, but because BK is so widely used, he's just not really that special. I think, honestly, again, our free unit's really good. Titania is something that most people won't have, at least on a movement type class, so that's really good. I mean, when I'm trying to compare to SM Erica and you have competition like Leo, like Titania is going to be a good unit for most people, and I'm pretty happy about getting that. The other units, unfortunately, just have too much competition, not really worth using any of them. Well, let's take a look at our math. Should you decide to jump into this banner for either fodder or something else, whether it be for collecting the units for collectible reasons or farming dragon flowers because Aya said, hey, you want 40 dragon flowers? We'll summon on new banners. Yeah, no, don't do that. I predict by book 4 is when likely the flower cost will decrease. But anyways, so as always, red is the hardest to pull for, which is unfortunate because red has really good fodder and the best unit, I would say, out of the batch. Don't walk into summoning red on a 4-person banner without at least 400 orbs. It is absolutely suffering. Some people, not even some people, 1 in 10 people spend 400 orbs for 1 copy of Ike on this banner. Like, that's not worth really going for, in my opinion. Distant counter, special fighter. The Heart's Blade, though, and the Greil's Axe, those Heart's Axe, those are good weapons, but I don't necessarily think they're worth summoning so many orbs for, especially when the banner lasts a whole month. And there's also that find and vote banner at the end of the month that you really should take into account when you really want to like spend orbs here. At least see that banner before you do here, if you were to choose to go into this. If all things said though, since there is a split focus here between Lilina and Greil, if you wanted like, let's say Fury 4, the Axe, and maybe Lilina's, did I just say Lilina? Mist. See, I told you. I told you. Mist and Lilina are pretty much the same character on this banner. Right, so Mist, if you wanted Mist, the rally attack speed pretty much the plus, that being like the luxury fodder from her, and Greil with his Fury 4 plus the axe would be pretty good value because both of them could give you something out of it. Would mean that you'd get maybe one copy of them every like 100 orbs or so. So that's your best bet here. Green tends to be the lowest amount of orbs spent for 5-star focuses, which is good. And you have a split focus here. So if you're okay with both of those, that's probably where your value lies in fodder. Honestly, with Soren, I just don't recommend pulling for Soren. Like, the dude just doesn't really have anything that I think is game-breaking in any way. So that pretty much sums it up. If you're going to go in here, green is the place to be. And red, if you're feeling lucky. Punk, don't do it. That's pretty much my take on the units for this banner. Nothing too crazy, no meta shifts. Decent fodder, but nothing crazy as well. Fury 4 could really be nice for a lot of characters, but... it's, again, with there's some changes that just keep coming. You never know when some of these skills might become more available. I definitely expect within at least half a year that Rally Pluses become available through TTs or GHBs. And you never know when you might start getting our first level 4 skills. Keep in mind, the March update will let you inherit 4 skills instead of 3. This is a very good change for those level 4 skills, or units like Nyla who can fodder off distant counter and all 3 levels of Null Seed Disrupt. That could imply some things in the future, but that pretty much sums it up. So thank you so much for watching. Give the video a thumbs up if you haven't already. Sub to the channel if you haven't. Please let me know in the comments below what you think of these units, any specific special builds that you maybe consider getting in the future. Don't forget these units will end up on legendary banners 4 to 5 months from now, maybe 6. And that could be your opportunity to pick them up along with some legendary or mythic heroes if you save your orbs now. All that being said, I'll see you guys probably in a few days. Maybe I'll cover a weapon refine analysis on the huge batch we had. I do have some demand for that, so I think I'll get to work on getting that ready. Thank you so much for supporting everything. Love you all. Peace.